Thank you so much for watching Landumc Goes There. Please subscribe and hit the like button and the bell notification button. These days, when Hollywood announces that they're going to make a movie based on a toy, we aren't shocked at all. But that wasn't the case at all 40 years ago, when Hollywood made a movie about a board game. That's when Clue hit movie theaters in 1985. This little gem of a film has had time on its side. It's developed somewhat of a cult following, with the ability now to watch all three of the alternate endings at once. The storyline follows 7 unrelated guests that gather at a Gothic New England mansion in order to protect the anonymity of all these hand-picked invitees. The butler, Wadsworth, and the well-endowed French maid, Yvette, have given them all secret code names: Miss Scarlet, Miss Peacock, Professor Plum, Colonel Mustard, Mr. Green, Mrs. White, and Mr. Bodie. After they break the ice by exchanging the usual pleasantries, the lights go out, and warm, bright blood stains the manor's thick carpets. Everyone at this point is a suspect, as each of the equally suspicious guests had a motive and the opportunity to kill. But who is the real killer? Originally, the project had a totally different director. That director was John Landis. He's the one that originally crafted the whole idea and had every intention of directing it himself. He contacted Jonathan Lynn to write the screenplay for it, a guy that wasn't really known in Hollywood. He was more known for British TV work. As a little bit of time passed, Landis decided to direct the Chevy Chase, Dan Aykroyd comedy Spies Like Us instead of this film, which left the movie without a director. But Landis was impressed with Lynn's background in theater, and he's the one that suggested that he direct the film. He thought with his amazing theatrical background and the fact that he was a guy that worked hard and was passionate about his projects, he thought that even though Hollywood didn't know this guy, that he would be a great choice for the film. Landis had all the initial framework for the movie in place, but he didn't have an actual solution to the mystery in it. So he decided to get a real writer by approaching playwright Tom Stoppard. He worked for an entire year on the script before he gave up on it and returned the paycheck that he had gotten in advance for the project. He also tried 2 or 3 other screenwriters that turned down the project too. Then he was eventually introduced to Jonathan Lynn, who not only figured all the writing out in it and came up with a very usable script, he slid into that director's role pretty easy. In the movie's original cast, its biggest star initially was Carrie Fisher, but days before she was supposed to show up for rehearsals, she ended up going into rehab. At that time, the director and the actress both hoped that she would work out a schedule that would allow her to receive treatment and do the film at the same time. But the companies that insured the project weren't having any of that. So the role of Miss Scarlet was passed on to Leslie Ann Warren instead. Initially, Miss White's role was fairly limited in the film, but that changed when Madeline Kahn came aboard the project. Initially, her part was very underwritten in the first draft of the script, but when Kahn became interested in the part, Lynn went back and expanded that role so that she would take it. The screenwriter set the film in New England in 1954, deliberately recalling tones of old Hollywood and those days. And while filming, he wanted his cast to keep that in mind. It's pretty interesting that each of the main characters' classic cars reflects the color given in their name. So when we first see Miss Scarlet, she's by the side of the road next to a red car. And Professor Plum also gets a plum-colored car. We see Colonel Mustard has a yellow car, and then Miss Peacock's is blue, and so on and so on. The story goes that Leslie Ann Warren's corset was so tight on her that she couldn't sit down. The costume designer Michael Kaplan dressed her in boned corsets, and she really struggled in this costume. And while the rest of the cast was enjoying games of pool in the billiard room, she was leaning against a board just watching. Now that board that I'm talking about was something they devised for her to lean against and rest, and they did have armrests there. But the fact that she couldn't sit down at all is what made it a problem. She spent a lot of time perched in that position in between takes. The director was not a fan of improvisation. He wanted actors to go straight by the script. One of the stars of the movie wasn't a big fan of that, and that was Madeline Kahn. So when Miss White is supposed to talk about how much she hated Yvette, Kahn just lets loose on her, sliding into her whole dialogue that she makes up as she goes. The way it was originally written is that she was supposed to hate her so much that she wanted to kill her. They shot 3 or 4 versions, and each time it got funnier than the last. The film famously features 3 different solutions to the mystery, and they originally played in different theaters across the country, which many think is one of the reasons that the film was a box office flop, because no one knew what version to see. In the planning stages of the movie, the director wanted 4 different endings, and they scripted a 4th, but they later scrapped it because it just wasn't working. Now, at the time of casting in the project, the role of Yvette, the maid, was one that seems like everybody in Hollywood wanted. People all the way from Jennifer Jason Leigh to Madonna. But Colleen Camp is the one that landed the role, and she landed it by really making herself stand out at the audition. She was determined to get this job. She showed up to the audition in a rented maid's outfit with an enormous amount of cleavage showing. The director saw this and knew immediately that she had won the role. The director even said in a 2013 interview that he was impressed with her comedic acting skills. It was her well-endowed figure that ultimately convinced him that she was the one for the part. Go back and take a look at this really fun film. It's well written, well directed, and keeps your attention the entire time. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll continue to chase the classics.